Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I wasn't even supposed to be home that night. That's the part that won't stop looping in my head. If Dave hadn't bailed on our weekend trip at the last second, I'd have been up north in that crappy rental cabin, probably half drunk, slouched in a lawn chair by the fire pit, arguing about which horror movie had the best monster. But instead I was alone in my apartment, sprawled on the couch with my feet on the coffee table, halfway through some forgettable Netflix series I couldn't name now if you paid me. It was just after midnight when it started. Not knocking, pounding. I froze, remote in hand, heart skipping a beat. At first I thought it was my upstairs neighbors. They were notorious for stomping around like elephants, usually drunk and yelling about poker or politics on weekends. But this sound wasn't from above. It was from my front door. And it was loud, hard enough to make the doorframe shudder. I muted the TV, the sudden silence amplifying everything. My breathing, the distant hum of the fridge, the blood pounding in my ears. The pounding came again, 3 sharp, deliberate hits followed by a weird pause, and then more, faster and more erratic. Whoever it was, wasn't trying to be polite. I live alone, second-floor unit, in a sleepy little complex in South Crestfield, a quiet, nothing-ever-happens town just outside of Chicago. That's exactly why I moved there after the break-in scare last year. The place is old but solid. Usually the worst thing you hear at night is a stray dog barking or someone over-microwaving popcorn. But that night, everything felt wrong. I backed away from the couch and made a beeline for the bedroom. My fingers found the handle of the old wooden bat under the bed, leftover from my Little League years. I'd started keeping it there after that close call when some junkie tried to pry open my back window. I tiptoed back to the front door, bat tight in hand. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned toward the peephole. It was Chloe. She lived a couple doors down. We weren't close. Just nodded hellos at the mailbox, once exchanged complaints about the laundry machines eating coins. She was always quiet, polite, kept to herself. But now she looked like she'd crawled through hell. Blood streaked down one side of her face. Her lip was split and already swelling. Her eyes were wide and glassy, flicking nervously over her shoulder like someone might appear behind her any second. I hesitated, but just for a beat, then popped the deadbolt and opened the door. She shoved past me without waiting, slamming the door shut so hard the walls shook. "Please," she gasped. Her voice cracked like her throat was raw. "You've got to get me out of here, my boyfriend, he's trying to kill me." My mouth opened, but all that came out was a stammer. Wait, what? Chloe? There's no time, she snapped, cutting me off. "Please, if you help me, he'll kill you too, I swear to God." Her words hit like a brick to the chest. I didn't know her well, but she looked wrecked, terrified and trembling, her clothes torn at the shoulder, her breath coming in shaky bursts. I didn't think. I just acted, grabbed my keys off the wall hook, phone, wallet, shoved into my pockets. Chloe was already clutching my arm, half pulling me toward the door. We bolted down the stairs, her fingers knotted in the fabric of my hoodie. Every few steps, she looked back like she expected someone to be following us, ready to grab her from behind. I barely remember getting into the car. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I reversed out of the lot fast, not even checking for traffic. "Where should I take you?" I asked as we hit the main road. "You got a friend nearby, family, the cops?" She shook her head hard. "No, just take me to a motel. Somewhere I can call the police, please." She sounded desperate, real, like someone running on adrenaline and pure fear. I didn't press her. A few minutes later, we pulled into this 24-hour motel right past the town line. You know the kind. One flickering neon sign, a crooked satellite dish on the roof, paint peeling in curls from the siding. It looked like a murder scene waiting to happen, but it was the only thing open. The night clerk behind the glass gave us a suspicious look. I leaned in, dropped my voice. Her boyfriend beat her. His eyes changed instantly. He just nodded, slid a key across the counter. Room 214. Chloe took the key with a trembling hand. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. Then she turned to me. "Can you get me some ice for the swelling?" "Yeah, of course." I jogged toward the vending area, trying to process what the hell just happened. Heart hammering, skin buzzing, and the image of her bloody face burned into my brain. When I got back to the room, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone clutched in one hand, the other pressing the bag of ice gently against her face. "They're sending someone," she said quietly, barely meeting my eyes. She let out this strangled, half-swallowed sob, then broke completely. Her body folded in on itself as she cried, deep, soul-shaking sobs that made my chest ache just listening. I sat on the edge of the second bed, unsure what to do, but I told her she was safe now, that I'd stay until the cops got there, just in case. She nodded, still sniffling, wiping at her face with the sleeve of her bloody shirt. "He's always been like this," she whispered. "But tonight I finally tried to leave. He came home and saw me packing. Lost it. It all clicked then. The panic, the blood, the way she'd pounded on my door like her life depended on it. It fit. It felt real. But as the minutes dragged into an hour, something shifted. No sirens, no flashing lights, no cruisers pulling into the lot, and the front of the room faced the entrance. You'd see them coming. I checked my phone. Still no updates. I turned to her. "Think you could call them again just to check in?" She barely shrugged. "They're probably busy," she murmured, like it didn't matter anymore. Her tone was off, detached. That's when my gut started whispering that something wasn't right. She wasn't jumpy anymore. Not pacing, not peeking through the blinds. Just sitting there, almost too calm. Like she was waiting, but not for help. And then I noticed the blood again. Her t-shirt was soaked, not just dotted with blood. Soaked like she'd been dipped in it. And I started doing the math. A busted lip, a cut above her eye. Enough for a mess, sure. But this much? It didn't add up. Not even close. I tried to keep my tone light. "You got any other injuries, like stomach or something?" She didn't even blink. "No, just my face." Lie. The moment she said it, something clenched in my chest. Everything went cold. My fingers twitched toward my phone. "I think I'm gonna call the cops again," I said, casually pulling it from my pocket. She stood. "Don't." My eyes dropped to her hand. There was something metallic, glinting. A knife. Every muscle in my body locked up. My throat went dry. I just froze. "Put the phone down," she said softly. So I did. I'd never had a weapon pulled on me before. It's like your brain fractures, half of it screaming to run, the other half completely blank, staring at the blade like it might disappear if you just don't move. She sat back down, calm as ever, like we were discussing travel plans over coffee. "I need you to drive me to the border," she said. "Canada, tonight." I blinked. My mind reeled. We weren't far, maybe an hour and a half from the crossing, but I wasn't about to become some fugitive's getaway driver. "Okay," I said slowly, "but I haven't eaten since lunch. Can I order something first?" She considered it for a second, then nodded. "Fine, but I'm picking it up. You're not leaving this room." "Fair." I pulled out my phone again, thumbs trembling, and opened DoorDash. Picked a random late-night pizza place. In the notes section of the order I typed, "Please call 911, room 214 at Crestview Motel. Woman has a knife. Urgent." I kept the screen angled just right, feigning boredom, pretending to scroll. She didn't even glance at me. 15 agonizing minutes later, there was a knock. She got up and opened the door. 2 plainclothes officers burst in. One had a taser raised. She barely had time to turn before they tackled her to the floor. The knife clattered against the tiles. She screamed, a raw, inhuman sound, but they had her cuffed in seconds. Later, I found out her name wasn't even Chloe. She'd stabbed her boyfriend multiple times, left him bleeding out in their apartment. He'd managed to drag himself to a neighbor's door to get help, barely made it. She wasn't the victim, she was the monster. When I got back to the apartment complex the next morning, the place was crawling with cops. Blood smeared in the hallway outside her unit. Forensics teams, crime scene tape across her door. I gave a full statement, every detail I could remember. The officer said I was lucky. If I hadn't called for help when I did, there's no telling how that night would have ended. It still haunts me. Because the truth is, I believed her. One sob story. One pair of desperate, bloodied eyes. That's all it took for me to unlock my door and let a killer into my home, into my car, into a motel room where if I hadn't kept my cool, I might not have walked away at all. I was 19 that summer, just back from my first year of college and already itching for space. My parents were relentless, constantly on my case about internships, job fairs, resumes. I needed out. That's when Uncle Jeff called. He owned this crusty little place, the Desert Pine Motel, tucked off Highway 83, 20 minutes outside Abilene, Texas. Said he needed someone he could trust for the night shift. The hours were graveyard, the pay barely minimum wage, but honestly, it sounded perfect. The motel was straight out of some forgotten postcard, faded green sign, flickering neon, and a parking lot full of potholes. But it was quiet. Most nights it was just me in that dim little front office watching old movies and munching on greasy takeout from the diner across the road. The guests were mostly truckers, passing couples, and the occasional weirdo who gave off that itchy feeling, but no one ever caused any real problems. I'd bring comic books, sometimes doze off with my feet kicked up on the counter. Nights dragged, but they were peaceful. I've always been a night owl anyway. Looking back, it was the easiest job I ever had, until that night. It started off like any other. A Friday. Hot in that mean, relentless Texas way, where the air conditioner runs nonstop and still feels useless. I was halfway through a styrofoam container of chicken fried steak, slumped in the office chair, watching an old western where the hero always walks away clean. The hum of the TV and the buzz of the fluorescent lights made everything feel slow and distant. Then the fire alarm shattered it all. A piercing gut punch of a sound so loud it almost knocked the fork from my hand. I jumped to my feet, heart slamming in my chest. Red strobe lights blinked on the monitors. Room 12. Smoke everywhere. Shit, I breathed, grabbing the fire extinguisher off the wall. Uncle Jeff's words were already ringing in my ears. If that place catches fire, I'm screwed, and so are you. The insurance was a joke, barely covered a busted light bulb, let alone a full-blown fire. I sprinted down the hallway, shoes squeaking on the linoleum, and kicked in the door to room 12. The smell hit me first, sharp, chemical, acrid, like burning plastic and cleaning fluid. Thick gray smoke curled from a trash can in the center of the room. The flames weren't big, more like the end of a dying campfire, but they were climbing fast, licking at the air. I unloaded the extinguisher without hesitation. Foam hissed out in thick white bursts, swallowing the fire in seconds. My hands were shaking. I coughed, waving smoke from my face, the canister heavy in my grip. "That's it," I said out loud, like saying it would make it true. Crisis over. But even as I stood there catching my breath, something felt off. The room was technically empty. No guest in sight. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled like someone left in a hurry. Window wide open. But there was a weird pressure in the air, like stepping into a room right after a fight. The smoke wasn't the only thing hanging around. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Uncle Jeff. "Tell me you got it under control," he barked before I could even say hello. "Yeah," Fire's out. Just a trash can, no damage. Jesus, he muttered. You're a damn lifesaver. Listen, check the room. Make sure there's nothing the fire department would want to write up. We don't need that kind of attention right now. Click. He hung up before I could say anything else. I pocketed the phone and looked around again. My skin prickled. I stepped deeper into the room, past the half-burned can and toward the foot of the bed. That's when I saw it. The stuff scattered across the floor. Clothes. Small ones. Children's clothes. They were scattered across the stained carpet like someone had carefully unpacked them and then forgotten the rest of the world. A faded Buzz Lightyear t-shirt, tiny pink sneakers with worn soles, cartoon underwear, bunched near the corner of the bed. It was also achingly specific, like it belonged to someone who was supposed to be safe, at home, tucked in and dreaming. My stomach twisted. Kneeling down, I noticed crumpled sheets of paper between the clothes. Drawings. The kind kids make with crayons and too much pressure, where the wax tears through the page. I picked one up. It took me a moment to process. A stick figure inside a cage. Another figure, smaller, drawn with wide blue tears pouring from its face, cornered by looming black shapes with angry red eyes. One page showed a small child on the ground. Red scribbles exploded from the head, while taller stick figures stood nearby, their mouths curved into exaggerated, sickly smiles. I felt the air shift. The heat from the extinguished fire still radiated off the walls, but a chill crept up my spine. I backed away from the drawings slowly, as if the room might wake up and remember I was there. Back at the front desk, I pulled open the dusty registration log. Room 12 had been signed out under a single name. Marcus Bell. No mention of kids, no +1, no scribbled notes in the margins about guests or companions. Just his name in neat, controlled handwriting. I stepped outside. The parking lot was half-lit and restless. A handful of guests stood barefoot on the cracked asphalt, wrapped in robes and blankets, eyes squinting toward the building. A man in boxers lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. Someone else whispered, "Was it real?" Like they couldn't believe the alarm hadn't just been a dream. "Anyone here named Marcus Bell?" I called out, loud enough to carry. They looked at each other, puzzled. One woman asked if it was safe to go back inside. I hesitated, then nodded, still rattled. "Yeah, just a small fire. It's out." The fire department rolled up a few minutes later. I walked them through it, told them about the smoke, the trash can blaze, how I put it out. But I kept the rest to myself. The clothes, the drawings. Not yet. Not until I knew what I was dealing with. Once they left, I locked up room 12. My hands shook as I dialed the police. The officers arrived around 3:00 a.m., flashlights in hand, the gravel crunching under their boots. I led them straight to the room and showed them everything. The clothes on the floor, the papers, the name in the registry. "You're telling us just one guy rented this room? No kids listed?" One of them asked, crouching to shine his light over the Buzz Lightyear shirt. "Yeah, just him. Marcus Bell. That's the only name in the book." They were quiet after that, took photos, bagged the drawings in plastic evidence sleeves like sacred things. One officer, Delgado, hung back while his partner stepped away to radio something in. "You did the right thing calling us," he said, voice low. "We'll run the name, see if it matches anything in the system. But, just between us, this looks bad. Really bad." I nodded, numb. When my shift ended, I went straight home, showered, lay down, and just stared at the ceiling. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing those drawings, the red scribbles, the cage, the twisted grins. Days passed. Then weeks. No word. I kept asking Jeff if the cops had followed up. He shrugged every time. "Nah, no one's called. Probably just some freak. Sicko left weird drawings and lit a fire. Happens more than you think," he said, like it was nothing. Let it go. But I couldn't. Not really. Because what if Marcus Bell wasn't even his real name? What if those clothes belonged to real children, and those drawings weren't just creepy art, but actual cries for help? A story told the only way a kid knew how. I started checking missing persons pages late at night, scrolling through blurred photos and short bios, looking for something, anything. A little girl with pink shoes, a boy who liked Buzz Lightyear. I never found a match, but sometimes in those late-night spirals I'd think about something even worse. What if the fire wasn't meant to cover it all up, but to reveal it? What if someone set that blaze hoping someone like me would come running and find what they'd left behind? Maybe those pictures were meant for someone, anyone, who might believe them. Maybe that night, I was the only one who ever saw them. A silent message scrawled in wax and desperation. Or maybe it was just madness. The unraveling of a sick mind. Either way, room 12 at the Desert Pine Motel's been locked ever since. Jeff won't admit it, but I know he's spooked. He keeps the key in the bottom drawer now, under a pile of receipts he never checks. Pretends it's under renovation. No one's rented it out since. As for me, I transferred the next semester. Bigger city, brighter campus, day classes only. I've never worked another night job since. Still, some nights I wake up thinking about those drawings, wondering what I saw, or what I didn't, and whether somewhere someone remembers that room, and the child who might have tried to scream through crayon lines. I wasn't even supposed to be on the night shift. That was Eli's territory. He was the kind of guy who actually liked it. Slow hours, paperback westerns behind the desk, and the quiet hum of vending machines and power lines. Patient, older, unshakable. But then he came down with some stomach virus that hit him like a truck. Mr. Densley, our boss, called me in a panic, practically begged. Said it'd only be for a few days, just until Eli could keep down water again. I didn't have a good reason to say no. Back then I was 22, barely out of community college and already unsure what the hell I was doing with my life. I'd moved to Elmstead, Ohio, because it was cheap, quiet. Not much more than a faded speck on the map, a stretch of gas stations, thrift stores, and 2 motels that clung to the edge of the interstate like tired hitchhikers. The Ridgeway Motor Lodge was the lesser of the two. 30 rooms, cracked asphalt out front, and a busted neon sign that buzzed louder than it glowed. I'd only been there 4 months, mostly housekeeping, occasionally helping out at the desk when someone called in or when Densley couldn't find anyone else. The pay was crap, but the perks weren't bad. Free breakfast from the attached diner and minimal human interaction. Just the occasional drunk, a family passing through, or couples trying to slide by with fake names and no IDs. My mom always warned me about night jobs, especially at places like that. Said shadows got longer when no one was looking. She'd worked front desk at a roadside inn back in the 80s, and the stories she told still rattled around in my head sometimes. Stuff about weird guests, things found in beds, locks that didn't hold. But I brushed it off. That kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. Not really. I was wrong. It started the second night I was covering for Eli. A guy checked in under the name Glenn Ford. He looked mid-30s, maybe a little older. Tall, lean, like a distance runner or a recovering addict. Wore aviators, which struck me as odd. It was nearly 7 p.m. and the sky was all heavy gray clouds. He slid his credit card across the desk without saying much. "Looking to stay long?" I asked, half out of habit, half to fill the silence. He gave me this tight, practiced smile. Something like that. He asked for the room farthest from the office, room 103, one of the last in the single-level strip of units, right next to the tangled mess of woods at the edge of the property. "No Wi-Fi code?" I offered. "Nope. Breakfast is from 6 to..." "I'm good." That was it. He picked up a black duffel bag, nothing bulky but heavy-looking, and walked off without a word. There was something about the way he moved. Not stiff exactly, but too controlled. like he was conscious of every step, every swing of his arm, like he didn't want to be noticed, but somehow that made him more noticeable. I watched him go until he disappeared behind the corner. The first few nights were quiet, uneventful. Housekeeping left a note in the log. Room 103 still had the Do Not Disturb sign on the handle. That wasn't too unusual. Some guests preferred privacy, but by the end of the week, small things started to shift. The trash bins near the front lot kept getting disturbed. Not all of them, just a few bags, the ones closest to the last row, like someone was digging through them. Always late at night, always rearranged in ways that didn't feel accidental. Then there was the towel thing. I called his room one evening around 9, asked if he needed fresh linens. He answered almost immediately. "No need," he said, quick and clipped. "I bring my own." Not brought. Bring, present tense, like he wasn't just still there. He had no plans of going anywhere. By the end of the second week, the card he gave had been charged for 14 days straight. No complaints, no signs of checkout, no housekeeping entry, just a closed door at the end of the row, and a man who didn't want to be disturbed. And every time I passed room 103 during my rounds or when logging the meter readings, that little cardboard Do Not Disturb tag was still dangling from the knob, fluttering slightly in the breeze like a dead leaf hanging on through winter. It was always there. One night I stayed late after my shift. Eli was still down with whatever virus had gutted him, and Mr. Densley was out of town on some family emergency. I figured I'd kill the time and catch up on laundry since we'd had a few last-minute check-ins, and the linen bins were overflowing. I was in the back room folding sheets, half distracted, when the power flickered. Not a full outage, just a stutter. The fluorescence buzzed, dimmed, then came back with a weak hum. I stopped folding and listened. Thump. It sounded like something heavy hitting the ground outside, not metal, more like a duffel bag dropped from waist height. I held my breath. Then again, thump. I pushed open the back laundry door and stepped outside, squinting into the dark. The motion lights along the lot were out, and the only glow came from the office windows casting a soft yellow spill across the cracked asphalt. The air was still. Then I saw it, room 103's door. It was open, just a sliver, a thin black line like a slit in a throat. I froze. Every instinct screamed to turn around. But I didn't. "Sir?" I called, trying to sound composed. My voice cracked anyway. "Is everything okay?" Silence. No shuffle of movement. No cough. Nothing but the sound of wind catching the edge of the roof. I stepped forward, my sneakers crunching loose gravel with every step. The door swayed slightly as the breeze brushed past it, letting out a faint, eerie creak. When I finally reached it, I paused for a second, then gently pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Musty, damp towels, sweat, stale air that hadn't moved in days. The lights were off, curtains drawn tight. The bed was unmade, blankets kicked to one side, but there was no sign of the guest. No bags, no shoes, no Glenn, and that little Do Not Disturb tag. Gone. He was just gone. Back at the desk, I flipped through the registration log and dialed the number Glenn had written. Disconnected. No voicemail. Just a cold, hollow beep. The credit card he'd used? Valid, but prepaid. Completely untraceable. I reported everything to Mr. Densley the next morning. He barely blinked. "Guy probably skipped out," he said. "Left you a mess to clean up is all." Except it wasn't just a mess. When I went back that afternoon to clean the room, something felt off. Not wrong in a loud way, just wrong in the way an abandoned playground feels in winter. And there was a smell. Faint, almost masked by the usual motel funk, but definitely there. A wet, metallic edge, like mildew and copper. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. The shower was dry. No towels. No personal items. Then I opened the closet. It was empty except for a box shoved way into the back corner, nearly wedged behind the built-in shelf, taped shut with layers of thick gray duct tape. I crouched slowly, every nerve in my body pulling taut. The box was heavy when I touched it. Too heavy. The bottom was damp. A deep reddish-brown stain had soaked through part of the cardboard. My throat tightened. I whispered, "What the hell?" and stood up fast, heart jackhammering in my chest. I didn't open it. Something primal, some old buried instinct was screaming at me not to. Instead, I grabbed gloves from the housekeeping cart and carefully pulled the box out. It left a long, wet smear across the carpet. Then I called the police. What followed changed everything. They showed up quick, asked questions, took statements, pulled the security footage, and just my luck, the camera covering room 103 had mysteriously gone dark around midnight the night Glenn vanished. Corrupted data. No backup. Then they opened the box. One officer gagged and turned away. The other just muttered, "Jesus Christ." Inside wasn't a body, not entirely. It was a head, wrapped tightly in one of our motel towels. Female, brunette, maybe early 20s. It took weeks to ID her. A missing persons case from a county over. Her name was Riley Mendes, waitress. Disappeared over a month ago. And Glenn, or whoever he really was? Gone. No trace. The name was fake. The credit card? Tied to a deceased man, an elderly vet who died months prior in a nursing home in Kentucky. There were no leads, no prints, nothing but that box. I quit 3 weeks later. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark slit of the door, felt the weight of the air in that room. I couldn't walk past a closet without that low, crawling fear skittering up my spine. Even now, sometimes I still dream about it. In the dream, I'm back there folding towels. Everything looks normal. Then I catch the smell. That sharp, coppery tang that gets into your nose and sticks to the back of your throat. I turn. The closet door creaks open on its own. The box is there. Only this time, it's breathing. I used to work evenings at this rundown roadside motel just outside Marlow, Nebraska. It was the kind of place you barely noticed when you passed it. One long row of chipped beige doors, a tired little diner clinging to one end, and a gravel parking lot where the faded yellow lines had all but disappeared under layers of dust and oil stains. Not much to brag about, but it paid, and at the time I couldn't afford to be picky. I'd just gotten out of a bad situation with my ex, the kind where you don't pack up so much as you vanish. A buddy of mine let me crash in his basement while I tried to piece my life together. The job came with a free dinner and didn't clash with my early morning community college classes, so it made sense. Plus, I figured those long, quiet nights would give me time to study, maybe finally start pulling myself out of the hole I'd been sinking into. The place was called Red Pines Inn, which was ironic since there wasn't a single pine tree for miles. Just flat land, brittle grass, and empty wind. The building looked like it hadn't been touched since the 40s. Paint peeled off the siding. The carpets inside smelled faintly of mildew and bleach, and the vending machines always jammed unless you hit them just right. There were stories, of course. Places like that always collect them. The one that stuck with me, even though I tried to laugh it off, was about room 6C. Supposedly a woman who lived nearby back when the motel was something fancier, some kind of motor lodge for traveling businessmen, hung herself in that room. And no one found her for weeks. People said she was headless when they finally did, though no one ever explained how that part happened. I didn't buy it. Not then. I chalked it up to small-town drama passed around too many times. Davey, the guy who had the job before me, told me the story my first week on shift. He was one of those guys who loved weird tales, conspiracies, ghosts, UFOs. He'd lean in close with this gleam in his eye and say things like, "Don't go poking around 6C after dark. She don't like company." Then he'd smirk and go back to his crossword. I'd always just rolled my eyes. Ghosts? No thanks. Real people were scarier, the kind who hit you, stalk you, break you down piece by piece. I'd had enough of that. Ghosts were just stories people told to make sense of things they didn't want to understand. For a while, Nothing happened. I showed up, handed out keys, cleaned up spilled coffee, refilled the vending machines, and occasionally brought someone a forgotten toothbrush or towel. It was boring, predictable, kind of peaceful even. That was until the night the sisters came. It was early February, and the cold was brutal, the kind that slices through your jacket like you're not even wearing one, settling deep into your bones. That night the wind was shrieking across the plains like it wanted inside, slamming grit against the windows in gusts. I was working the desk, and Marcy was running the diner. She was pushing 60, a sharp-tongued firecracker with a smoker's laugh and hands that never stopped moving. She'd been there longer than anyone and knew all the regulars, including 2 guests we were expecting that night, Agnes and Loretta, sisters, elderly, came in maybe 3 times a year, always stayed in 6C, and never paid a cent. Friends of the owner, Mr. Klein. They always get a bottle of wine, Marcy told me, handing me the key to the bar cabinet. Mr. Klein wants it to look like a surprise. Make it nice, you know? Sure, I said, already half checked out. I'll dress it up. I hadn't met the sisters before, but I'd heard enough about them. Polite, chatty, a little strange, but nothing to worry about. Mr. Klein clearly adored them, and I wasn't looking to get on his bad side, so I played along. They pulled into the lot just before 9. I saw the headlights first, an old maroon sedan crawling in like it didn't want to wake the motel. The engine shut off and everything went still. I ducked behind the counter like I'd been told, grabbed a bottle of Merlot from the cabinet, decent stuff we only used for special guests, and poured 2 glasses. I set them on a tray with a cloth napkin underneath, trying to make it look intentional, thoughtful. It was all part of the charm Mr. Klein wanted them to feel. I slipped out the diner's back door, careful with the tray, letting the cold slap me fully awake. The walkway between the diner and the rooms curved gently, barely lit by old amber bulbs hanging under the eaves. The one near 6C was flickering. I remember thinking someone should fix that before it went out for good. As I got closer, the tray trembling a bit in my hands from the wind or maybe the cold, I felt something shift. Not in the air exactly, more like in me. Like the air had changed pressure or the silence had weight. I brushed it off. Fatigue, maybe. The flickering light buzzed overhead as I reached 6C. I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal knob, turned it slowly, and stepped inside. The room smelled like every other in the red pines, faintly musty, a trace of floral cleaner lingering like someone had tried and failed to cover up the years. I set the tray down on the low dresser beside the TV, adjusted the pillows on the bed like I was prepping it for a catalog photo, then slipped out as quietly as I'd come in. That's when I saw her. At the far end of the walkway, just beneath the sputtering amber bulb, stood a figure in a long, pale nightgown. I froze. She wasn't moving. Her arms hung stiff at her sides. Her face, if there was one, was lost in shadow. From where I stood, it looked like she had no head at all, just bare shoulders rising into empty space. My lungs locked up. That primal, ancient kind of fear seized me like a fist to the chest. I couldn't think, couldn't move. My brain spat out a single absurd thought. It's her, the ghost, the one Davy joked about, the headless woman from 6C. I know how it sounds, believe me, I know. But standing there with the wind screeching around the corners and that damn light stammering overhead, it didn't feel funny. It felt wrong. Bone-deep wrong. Like my body had picked up on something my brain hadn't caught yet. Then she moved. She turned toward me slowly, like her limbs didn't quite want to follow, and that's when I realized it wasn't a ghost at all. It was Loretta. I'd find out her name later. One of the sisters. She was hunched over so far her chin nearly touched her chest, her back curled like a wilted stem. From that distance, with the flickering light and the way she stood so unnaturally still, it really did look like she didn't have a head. Her gaze cut through me, sharp and disapproving, and when she spoke, her voice was rough like gravel in a metal tin. "You ought to fix that light, young man," she said, nodding toward the buzzing bulb. I was still trying to remember how to breathe. Yes, ma'am, sorry. You just startled me is all." She gave a dismissive little huff, turned, and shuffled off toward her room. The door to 6C opened and swallowed her up. I stood there like a statue, still gripping the empty keycard, heart pounding so hard it was making my vision pulse. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. I ended up in the break room a few minutes later, just standing there like some idiot, trying to come down from whatever that moment was. I kept replaying it, trying to convince myself it was fine. Just a guest. Just an old woman with a spine condition, maybe some advanced scoliosis. Nothing supernatural, nothing real. But something didn't sit right. The way she'd turned, the way she moved. It was like watching a puppet on invisible strings, both floating and dragging, like her body didn't quite belong to her. The rest of my shift passed in a fog. I barely remember the hours. Just that I kept glancing at the monitors, avoiding the hallway cam like it could bite me. Around 5, Rosa came in for breakfast prep and I nearly jumped out of my skin when the back door creaked open. She gave me a long look. "Jesus, you look like you saw a ghost." "Didn't sleep," I lied. "Too much coffee." Later that morning, I was supposed to drop off the room keys for the two sisters. I headed over to the diner, figuring I'd find them at their usual table. And there they were. Margaret and Eileen, real as daylight, sitting side by side in their cardigans, smiling mid-conversation, forks picking at scrambled eggs like nothing was out of the ordinary, cheerful, present, whole. But that's when my stomach twisted again. The woman I'd seen the night before, she wasn't either of them. I approached casually, trying to sound normal. "Did you both get in all right last night?" Margaret smiled warmly. "Oh yes. The boys brought in our bags and we turned in early. Didn't leave the room once. We were exhausted." I swallowed, nodded. "Right, of course, just curious, did anyone else come in with you? Any other guests around your age arrive last night?" Eileen frowned, thoughtful. "Just us, dear. Place was quiet as the grave." I mumbled something about needing to grab coffee, then got out of there fast. My skin prickled the whole way back to the office. That afternoon, I checked the security footage. I told myself it was curiosity, but it was more than that. I needed to see something that made sense, something I could explain. Every camera feed was intact, except one. The hallway cam outside room 12, right where that light was flickering, had glitched. The footage jumped from 10:03 to 10:07 p.m. Clean, precise. A perfect slice cut out of time, with a burst of static like an erasure. Every other camera, crystal clear. That gap? That was exactly when I'd walked through with the wine. I didn't tell anyone. What could I say? That I saw a floating, headless old woman in the security system happen to short out at the same moment? That it terrified me more than any fight, stalker, or screaming match ever had? Even now, I don't know what I saw. But I know it happened. After that, I started listening when people told their stories. About the woman who died in that room, alone, undiscovered for weeks. The smell. The flies. The mattress they couldn't get clean no matter how hard they tried. And that detail we always laughed at. The one about her head. How it fell off because of the rot. It didn't seem funny anymore. I stayed at the Red Pines another month. I never walked that hallway after dark again. Never looked at that flickering light for more than a second. I told everyone I left for better pay, more hours, a job closer to school. But that was a lie. I left because I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stayed, I'd see her again. And next time, she wouldn't just walk away. It started with a flickering vacancy sign, struggling to stay lit under a washed-out yellow bulb at the edge of a crumbling road no one really used anymore. The Silver Pine Motel sat there, half swallowed by the surrounding woods, wedged between leaning trees and rusted-out highway markers that hadn't pointed anywhere useful in years. You'd miss it if you blinked. Hell, most people did. It wasn't listed on GPS, barely made a dent on older maps. But somehow, despite the rot and ruin, the place always had guests. Always. Locals in Ravenshade, a forgotten dot in rural Pennsylvania, didn't speak its name unless they had to. Not because of ghosts or creaky floorboards or flickering lights. No, what people whispered about was worse. People went missing there. Not loudly, not dramatically. They just vanished. Quietly. Without goodbye. Without a trace. But rumors are just that, right? This isn't a ghost story. There are no spirits in the walls, no vengeful wraiths. What happened at the Silver Pine Motel was flesh and blood. Real. Horrifyingly so. This is the story of the Hollow Men, a group bound not by ideology or belief, but by appetite, for pain, for mutilation, for rituals soaked in perversion. They turned a crumbling roadside stop into a slaughterhouse dressed as a roadside sanctuary. Between 1980 and 1983, a sickening pattern began to take shape across the mid-Atlantic. Women vanished, mostly the kind that society likes to ignore. Hitchhikers, sex workers, addicts, people already on the fringes, the ones whose cases collected dust. The only thing tying them together? Every single one had last been seen somewhere within 50 miles of Ravenshade. The epicenter? The Silver Pine Motel. At first, no one in law enforcement took it seriously. Too scattered, too circumstantial. It wasn't until one of them came back that anyone started paying attention. May 12, 1983. Ivy Malone, 24, was seen hitchhiking outside of Newbridge, heading south toward her cousin's place in Charleston Hollow. She never made it. 3 days later, she was found stumbling barefoot along a dirt road 10 miles out, her skin scraped and bleeding, her eyes glassy with shock. Her arm was broken in 2 places. She was wearing only an oversized flannel shirt. But it wasn't the bruises or the fractures that made the ER nurse drop the chart. It was her chest. Her left breast had been crudely sliced, half missing, as if someone had tried to carve it off with a kitchen knife. In the hospital, when she finally regained consciousness, her voice was barely a whisper. She said one word: Motel. Detectives Ron Maddox and Teresa Harland caught the case. They interviewed her gently, afraid she might shatter under the weight of her own memory. Eventually, when she was strong enough, they took her for a drive, circling back roads, hoping to jog something loose. And when they passed the Silver Pine, she froze. Her breath quickened. "That's it," she said, gripping the edge of the seat. "The one with the broken letter in the sign. That's where they took me." Her voice cracked. Room all the way at the end. 3 of them. She described them in vivid, nauseating detail. The first was short and wiry, with greasy black hair that clung to his forehead and a crooked, too-wide smile. He laughed while he hurt her. The second was massive, maybe 300 pounds, with a wandering left eye and a habit of humming old church hymns under his breath while holding a blade. But the worst was the one they called Father. Father Marcus. He wasn't like the others. He was quiet, clean-shaven, mid-40s maybe. He wore a priest's collar, but Ivy said he never once mentioned God. Not once. They weren't just torturing people, she told them. They were worshiping something. Her hands trembled as she spoke. There was an altar, not like a church one, just made from stuff in the room. Nightstands, lampshades, motel chairs, covered in candles and bones and these jars. Her voice dipped to almost nothing. One of the jars had, I think it was a breast. Mine wasn't the first. She said Father Marcus would chant in Latin, long guttural prayers that made the air feel thick. The large man would sob as he cut into their victims, as if mourning what he was doing while doing it anyway. The wiry one. He just watched through the lens of an old camcorder, filming everything. Ivy swore she could still hear the tape whirring in the dark, even now. After Ivy's harrowing testimony, authorities wasted no time. A judge approved a warrant within hours. The next morning, police raided room 19 of the Silver Pine Motel, but the Hollow men were already gone. What they left behind made even the most hardened officers pale. The room stank of bleach and something fouler beneath it, metallic, putrid. The mattress had been bolted to the floor. Its surface was stained, crusted in dark patches that hadn't fully come out no matter how hard someone had tried to scrub. Beneath the bathroom sink, they found a wooden box sealed with rusted latches. Inside were 14 human body parts, meticulously preserved. Among them, 5 severed breasts. On the nightstand drawer were 24 Polaroids, faded snapshots of mutilated bodies in varying states of decay. Some looked recent. Others had clearly been taken years earlier. The expressions frozen on those faces were twisted in agony. But there were no videotapes, no sign of Father Marcus, no trace of the others. Detective Teresa Harlan dove headfirst into the investigation. She combed through every lead, every scrap of information, and eventually uncovered Father Marcus's real name, Gareth Moeller. He had once been a seminary student in Ohio, expelled in 1973 after school staff found dismembered animals arranged in a bizarre pattern beneath his dorm bed. After that, he disappeared. No records, no sightings. A ghost. That is until 1980, when he resurfaced in Ravenshade. He didn't draw attention right away. He rented a barn just outside of town and started what he called a spiritual brotherhood. Locals described him as magnetic, soft-spoken, intense. He wore a collar, quoted scripture, and seemed to know exactly what to say to broken men. His followers were drifters, ex-cons, alcoholics, people looking for a second chance, something bigger than themselves. Gareth offered them that. He spoke of a higher power, the Hollow God, and told them redemption came through the offering. But Gareth didn't just take lives. He converted them, one ritual at a time. By the end of 1983, authorities had linked at least 18 missing persons to Gareth and his disciples. Names started pouring in. April Denning, last seen leaving a gas station 2 blocks from Silver Pine. Melissa Arburn, a college sophomore who'd pulled over to ask for directions. Kendra Avery, abducted from a truck stop minutes after her night shift ended. Every case followed the same pattern. Victim abducted within a few miles of the motel, left breast removed, throat slit, body dumped in the woods or back roads, always within a 20-mile radius. In 1984, they caught a break. Anita Grossman, a former maid at the motel, contacted detectives. She'd found a dusty, unmarked box tucked away in the attic above the motel office. Inside were 3 VHS tapes, each labeled with nothing but dates. Investigators watched them behind closed doors. The footage was grainy, washed out. Candlelight flickered. Shadowed figures moved in and out of frame. Chanting filled the room, low and guttural. The worst parts weren't the blood. It was the sound, pleading, victims sobbing, begging, tied to the motel bed frame. Their cries were drowned out by blaring classical music, played loud enough to shake the walls. The final tape ended with Gareth himself staring directly into the camera. "We are not monsters," he said. "We are vessels. We do not kill. We release." 2 years after Ivy escaped, police finally located the other 2 members. Daniel Tuck and Jasper Keene were arrested in an abandoned farmhouse in Guthrie County. Both had changed their names and appearances, grown beards, shaved heads, added weight or lost it. But they couldn't erase the tattoos. Strange looping symbols inked into their skin, the same symbols scrawled on motel walls and drawn in blood at the altar. Daniel broke first. He wept through the confession, choking on his own words as he described how Gareth had freed them, how they were told to eat parts of the victims as part of the ritual, how Gareth kept a locked chest they called the harvest, filled with preserved pieces of the dead. Gareth had convinced them they were chosen, that suffering was sacred. But Gareth Moeller was gone. After 1985, his name vanished from all public records. No trace on tax forms, driver's licenses, credit cards. Some believed he changed identities again, slipped into another town, started over. Others thought he was dead. The most disturbing theory? That he was still out there, recruiting, waiting. Daniel Tuck was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jasper Keene took a plea deal and received 45 years in exchange for cooperating. Ivy Malone disappeared into witness protection not long after the trial. The Silver Pine Motel was condemned and demolished in 1986. No one ever bought the land. To this day, locals avoid the site. They swear the ground reeks of old blood when it rains. Some say if you park too close, your radio will suddenly crackle with static. Then, just for a moment, blare that same haunting classical music from the tapes. And every year, on May 12th, someone leaves a sealed glass jar at the exact spot where room 19 once stood. Inside, always the same thing: a severed human breast. Let this be a reminder: the monsters aren't hiding under your bed. They're in the next room, smiling. I still don't know why I said yes that day. Maybe it was the way Gary stood hunched over the front desk, one hand pressed to his forehead like the weight of the motel, and maybe the entire damn world was balanced right between his eyes. Or maybe it was because I'd just found another bright orange parking ticket tucked under my windshield wiper, my second this month, and my checking account was so low I'd been eyeing my noise-canceling headphones like they were the only thing standing between me and a payday loan. Or hell, maybe I just wanted to prove I could handle more than unclogging toilets and replacing burnt-out hallway lights. Whatever the reason, that's how I ended up wading into a half-rotted pool behind the Clearwater Pines Motel, ankle-deep in slimy leaves and God knows what. Somewhere between Tallahassee and absolute nowhere, a little patch of road called Elk Rock. Back then, I was 20, a college sophomore juggling too many classes, a graveyard shift at a gas station, and the occasional weekend fill-in at the motel just off Highway 319. Clearwater Pines wasn't a palace, but it had its charm, the kind people only really notice after it's gone. White stucco walls, hunter green doors, and this big old-fashioned kidney-shaped pool right in the middle. Tourists used to love snapping pictures there, especially during golden hour. At least they did before the storm. 3 solid days of Florida downpour had turned the pool into something out of a nightmare. Twigs, palm fronds, floating soda cups, beetles by the dozen, and something that looked like a raccoon tail, though I tried not to dwell on what it might still be attached to. The water, once a clear, chlorinated blue, had curdled into this deep, filmy green in under 72 hours. Normally, we had a guy for this. Cliff, retired Navy, smoked like a chimney, always wore this battered straw hat. He'd show up with his truck and enough industrial-grade pool gear to make it look like a military operation. But when I asked about him, Gary just shook his head. "Cliff's booked solid," he said. "Post-storm cleanup across the whole county. Said he won't be free for at least a week." I raised an eyebrow. "So what, you want me to clean it?" Gary looked at me like a man dangling off a cliff with one hand. "Ben, we're losing guess. You see that sludge pit out there and tell me it doesn't make you want to drive straight back to I-10? I didn't answer. He leaned closer. "If you get it done before check-in rush, I'll clock you out for a full shift, plus $50 cash." $50. Not much in the grand scheme of things, but to a broke college kid living off discount ramen and stealing extra napkins from Speedway, it sounded like a miracle. So I nodded, grabbed the long aluminum skimmer pole, slung a towel over my shoulder and headed out to the back lot. I was wearing an old pair of sneakers and busted sunglasses that barely held together at the hinge. The sun was already cooking the pavement. Mid-July in northern Florida feels like someone pressing a hot, wet sponge over every inch of your skin. Thick, stifling, miserable. I'd been scooping sludge and drowned bugs for about half an hour, sweat soaking through my shirt when I heard the latch on the pool gate click. She stepped in like she owned the place. White sarong tied at the hip, red bikini, and these oversized gold-rimmed sunglasses that gleamed in the sun. Early 20s maybe. Skin bronzed like she'd just stepped off a yacht, confident in that effortless, deliberate kind of way. "Hey," she said, stopping just inside the gate. "Any idea how long before this place is, swimmable?" I paused, wiping sweat off my brow with the back of my hand. "Hard to say. Right now it's a swamp. Give it a week, maybe 2, if you don't mind the occasional tadpole." She laughed softly, then nodded toward one of the empty loungers. "Mind if I hang here anyway? Kinda just need to lay down for a bit." I shrugged. "Sure. Just don't blame me if something crawls out of that water and steals your flip-flops." She grinned and dropped onto the lounger like she'd been coming here for years, pulled a bottle of sunscreen from her tote and stretched out, legs glistening in the sun, eyes hidden behind those shades like mirrors. I went back to work, trying to focus on the skimmer pole and not the woman 20 feet away who looked like she'd wandered in from a music video. But it was hard to ignore her, especially when she started talking again. "So, you work here full-time?" "Just weekends," I said, glancing over my shoulder. "Between classes." "College boy, huh? Where at?" "Florida State. Business major." She propped herself up on one elbow. "Interesting. I just finished undergrad, psychology." I gave her a look. "Ah, so you're analyzing me already." "Only the easy ones," she said, smirking. "You practically wear your thoughts on your shirt." I laughed. The heat, the murky water, the weirdness of the situation, it all started to blur. The conversation helped. I stopped thinking about how disgusting the water was and just kept working. My brain shifted into that tired autopilot mode, the kind you slip into when you're too hot, too broke, and too deep in to back out. After a while, I managed to clear most of the shallow end. It wasn't pristine, but you could almost see the tiles again. The deep end still looked like a swamp full of secrets, but it was progress. She was quiet for a bit, just lying back on the lounger, soaking in the sun. And then she asked the question that still sticks in my head. "You think it's okay if I just dip my feet in?" I hesitated, mid-scoop. The shallow end looked passable. The surface had cleared up. No floating junk, no bugs I could see. Almost like a normal pool. Almost. "Yeah, should be fine," I said, nodding. "Just your feet though, seriously." She slid the sarong off, folded it neatly beside her, then moved to the edge of the pool and dipped her legs in. She gave a little gasp at the temperature, then smiled and settled in, swirling her ankles slowly through the water. I turned back to the skimmer net, figuring I had maybe another hour before I'd earned that 50. That's when I noticed something. Not a splash, not even a big ripple, just a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, squinting. Black shapes, tiny, darting, fast and low. At first I thought, leaves maybe? Or fish, though that didn't make any sense. Then I saw the legs. Spindly, jointed in unnatural places, twitching like broken wire. They weren't fish. They were coming from one of the pool's intake vents, at least 3 at first, slipping into the open water. Then more. I froze. "Hey, get your legs out," I said, sharp, urgent. She blinked at me. "What?" "Out! Now!" She followed my gaze, and the moment her eyes locked on the movement in the water, she screamed. Not the kind of scream you hear in movies. Real panic, primal and raw. It ripped out of her like something inside had broken loose. She scrambled back so fast she slipped, then caught herself, her knees slamming into the tile as she hauled herself away from the pool. She was crying and yelling, words I couldn't make out, and then she was gone. Just gone, sprinting barefoot across the patio, soaking wet and shaking. And I just stood there, frozen, because they were everywhere now. A dozen at least. Jet black, wet-looking creatures crawling up the slick tile walls of the pool, rising like they'd been waiting for something. Some swam in lazy, slow circles. Others just floated, limbs twitching, then surged forward toward the spot where her feet had just been. If you've never seen a Florida giant water bug up close, consider yourself blessed. Locals call them toe biters. Wide, flat, oval bodies. Spiny legs that skitter like claws. They've got pincers sharp enough to draw blood through denim. Not venomous technically, but that doesn't matter. Their bite doesn't sting, it hurts. Like something tearing muscle. And worse, they fake death. They pretend. I dropped the net and stumbled back. Later, I told Gary I wasn't finishing the job. "Come on, Ben," he groaned. "They won't hurt you." "They bite, man," I said, voice shaking. "They play dead. You don't get it. Cliff needs to handle this." He muttered something under his breath, but eventually gave in. Told me to drag a few loungers over and block the area off. Put up a sign. "Pool closed for maintenance." That was it. Nothing about the bugs. Nothing about Riley. Cliff showed up the next morning, looking like he was ready to walk into a nuclear spill. Full jumpsuit, elbow-length gloves, face like a man who'd seen worse and didn't want to talk about it. He poured gallons of vinegar, chlorine, and something else industrial-smelling into the water. Stood at the edge and muttered, "These things will lie still for hours, then crawl right out the skimmer like nothing happened." I didn't sleep that night. Riley, that was her name, never came back to the pool. She checked out early the next morning. No refund. Just walked into the lobby, face pale, suitcase in hand, told the front desk she was leaving and didn't say another word. Weeks passed. The pool got cleaned, drained, refilled. The bugs were gone. Cliff swore up and down it was safe again. Kids played there now. Inflatable swans, floaties, the works. But I kept seeing them, not the bugs, something else. That day, right before the swarm, I saw something that still makes my blood freeze if I think too hard about it. Just under the surface. Not a fish, not a shadow, nothing natural. A hand. Slim, pale, floating just beneath the green water. Motionless. Reaching upward. I didn't tell anyone. Not Gary, not Cliff, not my roommate back at school. I mean, what would I say? I saw a hand under the water, in broad daylight, in a motel pool. I didn't even believe it myself half the time. Maybe it was heat stroke. Maybe the reflection of a branch. Maybe I was running on no sleep and too much caffeine. Maybe I needed something, anything, to make it okay that I walked away from an easy job and $50. But sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I don't think about the bugs or the smell or even Riley's scream. I think about that moment, when the air felt too still, when the water didn't feel empty, when something under there knew I was watching. Gary offered me more shifts after that, said he could use the help on weekends. I told him I was buried in schoolwork, papers, midterms, whatever I could come up with. Truth was, I didn't want to go back. Still don't. I drive past Clearwater Pines every so often. The pool looks perfect now. Blue as a postcard, chlorine bright, kids splashing, tourists laughing, like nothing ever happened. And maybe it didn't. Maybe it was all in my head. But I haven't stepped foot in a motel pool since, especially not after a storm. And if I see something move under the surface, something that shouldn't be there, I don't investigate. I don't ask questions. I just walk away. Because sometimes saying yes to something small, something as harmless as cleaning a pool, opens a door you didn't know existed. And not everything waiting on the other side wants to be found. I was just 19 when I started working at the Horizon Pines Motel, a peeling, sun-faded place clinging to the edge of Highway 16, a few miles out from the town of Sumfield, Nebraska. Town might have been generous. If you blinked, you'd miss it. One gas station, a squat little diner with sticky tables, and a liquor store that didn't care who you were as long as you had cash. I was juggling 2 jobs back then, desperate to scrape together enough for community college tuition. Nights were for the gas station, fluorescent lights, sketchy customers, and counting the minutes until dawn. Mornings, though, I did housekeeping at the Horizon Pines. Different kind of hell. The routine was simple. Strip the beds, disinfect the counters, replace the mini shampoos, and pray to whatever god you believed in that you didn't walk in on someone tweaking, half naked or passed out cold. Sumfield had a serious meth problem. And the Pines, well, that place was a magnet for the worst of it. Every other room had a story. Some we shared on our breaks over cigarettes and burnt coffee. Most we didn't. But room 209, that one we still talked about. It was late July, the kind of day where the heat hums in your ears and every breath feels like it's been microwaved. The sun hit the motel hard, turning the stucco walls blinding white and warping the air just above the pavement. I was working that morning with Marble, this sweet middle-aged woman from Guatemala. She wore the same gold cross necklace every day like armor, tucked into her blouse, but always visible. Her English wasn't great, but she was sharp, kind, and cleaned like a machine. Then there was Caleb. Lanky, buzzed head, arms covered in random tattoos that looked like they'd been copied straight off a Pinterest board. He was usually late, sometimes still drunk, sometimes twitchy and wired, but he moved fast. Efficient in that strung-out kind of way. We had a system. Marble took the second floor, I handled the first, and Caleb floated, filling in the gaps. Every few rooms, we'd switch it up so no one got stuck with all the nastier jobs. It worked, mostly. That day started like any other. Sticky uniforms, the low buzz of box fans in open doorways, towels that never seemed to come out clean, and the occasional gut-turning smell that you learned not to question. I was in room 203, scrubbing toothpaste flecks off the counter, when I heard Marble shout, "Dios mío!" I froze. Marble never raised her voice. I dropped the rag, heart already pounding, and ran out into the hall. Room 209. That's where it came from. Caleb was already there when I got to the door, just standing stiff and quiet, inside the room with a look on his face that didn't sit right. Not shock exactly, more like a weird blend of confusion and fear, like he was still trying to process what he was seeing. Marble stood dead center in the room, hands pressed tightly over her cross, whispering under her breath in Spanish. Her eyes didn't move. They were fixed on the ceiling like it held the key to something terrible. "What's going on?" I asked, breathless. Caleb didn't speak. He just pointed upward. I followed his gaze. At first, I didn't get it. The room looked normal. Towels folded, bed made, window cracked open to let the stifling air move. Then I looked higher. Footprints on the ceiling. Not smudges. Not water stains. Actual barefoot prints, dark and dusty, like someone had walked straight up the wall and across the ceiling with filthy feet. The pattern went from just above the bed, up the wall in a straight line, and continued overhead in a trail of left, right, left, like some impossible march. It stopped at the top of the window, a tall thing, chest high at the base, and stretching nearly to the ceiling. The kind you'd see in those sleek hotel ads trying too hard to look expensive. The glass was broken, right at the top, a clean crack, like someone had stepped through it, from the ceiling. My stomach twisted, not with fear exactly, but confusion. I kept staring up, trying to make sense of it. My brain wanted a logical answer, something simple. Anything. Maybe someone climbed up and, I don't know, fell through? I offered, not even believing it myself. Caleb shook his head slowly, eyes still glued to the ceiling. "There's no way. Look at the wall. No scuff marks, no handprints, no furniture dragged over. And those prints..." He paused, his voice tightening. "They're not halfway. They're on the ceiling, like flat on it." Marble began to cry, soft and breathy, like she was trying not to draw attention to herself. Her hands stayed pressed tight over her necklace, and her lips moved in quiet prayer. Even when I put an arm around her, she didn't look at me. Her eyes never left the ceiling. "She thinks it's something evil," Caleb muttered, tone low and uneasy. I scanned the room again, trying to ground myself. No blood. No signs of a fight. Nothing overturned. Just those strange, impossible footprints overhead, the bedsheets tucked crisp and clean, and that shattered top pane of glass. But something was wrong. Not threatening, not like you needed to run, more like a current under your skin, like the gravity in the room was slightly off. The air felt thick, heavy, like breathing through cotton. We finished the shift in silence. No music from Caleb's beat-up Bluetooth speaker. No dark jokes. Just a tension that clung to us like humidity. After that, Marble wouldn't go near 209. Even when the manager rotated the room assignments, she found ways to swap out, begged, pleaded, whatever it took. So I took it. Every time. Not because I was brave, because I wasn't superstitious. I figured, this is meth country. People do bizarre, violent, unpredictable things when they're high out of their skulls. Maybe two guys got blasted. One of them tossed the other in the air during some weird freakout, and the guy got his feet on the ceiling before hitting the window. I mean, I'd seen people rip car doors off with adrenaline. The human body can be terrifying when it thinks it can't die. But still, every time I stepped into 209, something tightened in my chest. They painted over the ceiling eventually, some cheap off-white that didn't quite match the rest of the room. But the prints were still burned into my brain. I could see them whether I looked up or not, and no matter how many times I cleaned that room, I never once turned my back on the window. Never. I grew up in Sumfield. Poor kid. Single mom who worked third shift at the nursing home. My dad was long gone, left before I was even born. We lived in a trailer that leaned to one side and rattled when the wind picked up. Winters were hell. We used the oven to keep warm because the heater didn't work half the time. I wanted out. College was supposed to be my way up and out, my shot at something better. But dreams cost money. So I worked. Gas station overnights, motel mornings. 4 hours of sleep was a luxury. The rest was just grit. The Horizon Pines was supposed to be temporary, a blip on the way to something real. But that place, especially room 209, it stayed with me in ways I couldn't shake. A couple weeks after the footprints incident, I was back in 209, alone. It was a quiet morning. I'd just finished vacuuming, the hum still ringing in my ears, when something caught my eye behind the curtain. At first, I thought it was a smudge, but as I stepped closer, I saw it clearly. A handprint, small, child-sized. It was on the glass, inside the room, right near the top of the window. Not outside, inside. Pressed flat, like a kid had leaned up and slapped their palm against it. The problem was, that room was on the second floor. No balcony, no overhang, nothing to climb. And the print was high. Too high for any child to reach from the floor. I stood there, just staring at it, the vacuum cord still looped over my shoulder. Then I wiped the glass clean and didn't say a word. Not to Marble, not to Caleb, not even to the manager, who barely looked up from his phone most days and always smelled like weed and Red Bull. But that night, when I finally lay down in my narrow bed, sleep didn't come. I just kept seeing that little hand, pressed against the glass like it had been waiting. Isaac never imagined that trying to sell a computer would lead him into the darkest, most inexplicable chapter of his life. He just needed the money, plain and simple. It was the third week of September 1995 in Knoxville, Tennessee, a working-class town nestled in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains where the mornings were still choked with fog, and the concept of internet cafes felt like a rumor from bigger cities like New York. 24-year-old Isaac Dalton was a film student at the University of Tennessee, and he'd officially hit the wall. His part-time gig editing wedding videos had dried up, and the pressure of student loan debt was turning into something physical, tightness in his chest, knots in his stomach, tension headaches that made him see stars. About a year earlier, he'd made what he thought was a smart investment, nearly $18,000 on a Macron Vertex 950, a sleek black workstation that looked like a monolith and boasted 4 GB of hard drive space and 32 MB of RAM. It sounds like a joke now, but in '95, it was borderline science fiction. Isaac had plans, dreams even. He wanted to start a small production company, Maybe shoot indie documentaries or direct grungy low-budget music videos for local bands trying to claw their way out of basements. But life didn't care about any of that. Life had bills. So he listed the Vertex in the Knoxville Daily News classifieds. For sale, Macron Vertex 950 workstation, 32 MB RAM, 4 GB hard drive, like new, $17,500 OBO, serious inquiries only. Call 865-552-913. Ask for Isaac. He expected nonsense. Scammers, bargain hunters, tire kickers. Maybe a lonely computer geek who just wanted to talk specs. What he didn't expect was a man with a deep, clear voice who introduced himself as Thomas Reed, a freelance systems architect from Marietta, Georgia. Thomas sounded normal, smart even, polished. He said he'd been searching for that exact model for months. "I'm on contract with a private aerospace firm," he explained. "This system would literally save my team weeks of work." He spoke with just enough jargon to sound legitimate. Processor architecture, rendering times, SCSI interface throughput. Not too much, not too little. Then he made an offer that threw Isaac off. "I'll give you $18,500 if you bring it to me directly in Marietta. I'll cover gas in a motel if you need one. I just need it by the 24th. Isaac paused. The extra $1,000 would cover nearly 2 months of rent. 4 hours wasn't that far. Still, the change in plans felt weird. He hesitated. "I'll take it," he said finally. But he wasn't going alone. His fiancée, Claire Monroe, 23, sharp-eyed, fiercely grounded, and finishing her last year of nursing school at Pellissippi State, wasn't having it. "Someone offers more than asking, wants to change the meetup location, and expects you to drive 4 hours to drop it off?" she said, arms folded across her UT hoodie. "No way. That's sketchy as hell. You're not going by yourself." Isaac laughed, hoping to brush it off, but she didn't crack a smile. Claire didn't bluff. She had that radar, uncanny, bone deep, the kind of gut instinct you didn't argue with. Saturday, September 24th. They left before the sun came up, the sky still a soft gray behind a curtain of fog. Isaac's faded blue Honda Accord rumbled down I-40 with the Vertex carefully belted into the back seat like a fragile child. The drive was long but forgettable. Occasional semi-trucks, bitter gas station coffee, the low hum of a classic rock station crackling through the static. Thomas had said he'd meet them at his office near Marietta. But around 7:30 a.m., just half an hour outside the city, Isaac's cell buzzed. He picked up. "I need to make a change," Thomas said, voice calm and casual. "The entrance to the office park is under construction. Total mess. Let's meet at the Sunset Inn just off I-75. Easier for both of us." Isaac glanced at Claire. She was already staring at him. "You sure this is a good idea?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "We're in broad daylight," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "It's just a quick handoff." They pulled into the Sunset Inn at 8:15 a.m. It looked like the kind of place you crash when your eyelids are too heavy to make it to the next exit. Faded green siding, cigarette burns on the plastic sign, a parking lot cracked open like dried skin. The Coke machine out front was half lit, humming, but it didn't work. Claire kept her hand near her bag, where she had pepper spray and a folding pocket knife, just in case. They hadn't seen Thomas yet. But from that moment forward, something felt off, like the air had shifted, gone too still. Room 109. Thomas opened the door almost as soon as Isaac knocked. He looked ordinary. Average height, maybe 5'11", late 30s, with sandy brown hair, clean-shaven face, a thin frame. He wore khakis and a maroon sweater, the kind you'd see on a middle school math teacher. His smile was tight but polite. "Isaac, Claire, come on in," he said. The room smelled faintly of citrus air freshener, cheap motel soap, and stale cigarettes. The curtains were drawn. On the desk sat a worn laptop bag. The bed was still made. "Mind firing up the system?" Thomas asked casually, nodding toward the large black case Isaac carried. "Just want to make sure everything works." Isaac set the Vertex down on the desk, plugged it in, and flipped the switch. The machine whirred softly as it booted up. Thomas leaned in, eyes tracking every screen like a hawk. "Memories intact," Isaac said, navigating through specs and demoing some of the pre-installed editing software. Thomas nodded along. "This is perfect," he murmured. "Exactly what we need. My associate's bringing the check. He's just a few blocks away. Should be here in about 15. They made small talk. Thomas joked about Marietta being a decade behind the rest of the country, griped about bureaucrats and the snail's pace of government tech upgrades. Isaac laughed politely. Claire didn't. Then Thomas said something that made her sit up a little straighter. "You know, to save time, we could go ahead and load the machine into my car. It'll be easier once my guy gets here." Claire tilted her head, brow tightening. "I think we'll wait until the check arrives." There was a brief flicker in Thomas's eyes, something like a twitch, but then the polite smile returned. "Of course," he said. "Just trying to be efficient." Another 10 minutes passed. Claire leaned toward Isaac. "Let's get some air," she whispered. They walked to a nearby diner, picked up 2 coffees and a paper sack of biscuits. When they returned, it was past 9. Still no associate. Thomas shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. "Traffic must be a nightmare," he said with a forced chuckle. Isaac nodded, but his shoulders had tensed. Claire hadn't touched her coffee. She stood near the door, eyes scanning the lot outside. Then Thomas moved. Calmly, he stood up and stepped to the side of the bed. "I think we're ready to finish the deal," he said softly. He reached down, casually, like he was fixing a wrinkle in the blanket, and came back up with a small black revolver. "Lie down," he said, his voice smooth and without urgency. "Wrap yourselves in the sheets. Don't speak. Don't move." Claire froze mid-step. "What the hell are you doing?" Isaac whispered. "This will be over soon," Thomas said. "I just need time to leave. No one gets hurt if you do exactly what I say." Isaac's heart slammed against his ribs as he and Claire lay down, the thin motel sheets wrapped awkwardly around their torsos, pinning their arms. The floor smelled like mildew. His fingers shook uncontrollably. Claire's breath hitched as she blinked back tears. Then came the first blow. The hammer struck Isaac's head with a sickening crack. A flash of white, then searing black. He came to seconds later. Claire was screaming, a raw animal sound that didn't sound like her at all. Thomas was above her, hammer raised. It came down again, and again. Isaac tried to yell, to move, but his limbs were rubber. His eyes fluttered. Vision swam, then nothing. When he woke again, the room was quiet. The faucet ran in the background. A harsh chemical smell burned his nose. Bleach. Thomas was back, moving with mechanical precision, wiping down surfaces. Isaac heard a voice, his own, or maybe something deeper. "Play dead. Don't move. Don't breathe." Then the door slammed shut. For good. It was 9:32 a.m. when a maid found Isaac crawling into the hallway, face drenched in blood, body shaking, whispering for help. Claire died 2 hours later from massive cranial trauma. Isaac survived, but not whole. He suffered permanent hearing loss in one ear, vertigo that came in sudden waves, and a deep, gnawing PTSD that never let him rest. The police found the hammer stuffed under the bathroom sink, still wrapped in its SKU tag. It had never been used before. No prints, nothing traceable. Witnesses in the parking lot remembered the car, a dark maroon Dodge Dynasty with a red interior and Tennessee plates. A sketch was drawn. A public appeal went out. No one came forward. 2 years later, a break. Police in Atlanta arrested Martin Claiborne, a washed-up music producer with a history of fraud and a nearly identical modus operandi. He was charged in a double homicide. Motel room, 1996. Same story, same setup, same weapon. He was awaiting trial for a third murder, a former business partner, when guards found him slumped over in his cell. Heroin overdose. Massive. Enough to kill 2 men. He had no history of drug use. Official ruling: suicide. Isaac never saw a courtroom, never got to face the man or hear the words. No trial, no confession, no closure. Claire's family started a scholarship in her name, the Claire Monroe Nursing Scholarship at Pellissippi State. But fate wasn't finished with Isaac. In 1999, while working for AmeriCorps in New Mexico, his car was hit head-on by a drowsy truck driver. Isaac was killed instantly. He was 28. And somewhere, if Martin Claiborne wasn't truly Thomas Reed, someone else might still be out there, smiling, polite, waiting for his next classified ad, his next motel room, his next victim.